Chapter 3. The First School Day. The morning of Shane's first day of school arrived wrapped in mist. It clung to the fields and hedgerows like a second skin, softening the edges of the world until everything felt half dreamed. Shane walked beside his mother along the narrow lane, his school satchel bumping lightly against his hip with each step. The leather was stiff and smelled faintly of oil and newness, a reminder that this day belonged to a life he had not yet learned how to live. His mother kept her pace slow, matching his shorter stride without remark. She wore her good coat, buttoned carefully, as if the day required respect. "I used to walk this same road," she said, breaking the quiet. "Just like this, only I complain more." Shane glanced up at her, surprised. "You did?" She smiled. "Every morning," said. "The walk was too long, the air too cold, the lessons too dull. My mother told me I'd miss it one day." "Did you?" Shane asked. She considered this. Not at the time, but later, yes, especially the walking. They passed a gate where dew beaded on the wood, shining faintly. A bird lifted from the hedge as they went by, wings beating the mist into motion. "The school hasn't changed much," his mother went on. "Same stone walls, same yard, same bell. I sat at the back because I was quiet, and the teacher liked quiet children." Shane's fingers tightened on the satchel strap. "What if they don't like me?" She stopped then, turning to face him fully. She crouched slightly so they were eye to eye, her expression calm and certain. "They will," she said. "Not all at once, perhaps, but you'll make friends. You always do." "I didn't," Shane began, then stopped. "I know," she said softly and brushed his hair back from his forehead. "This is different. New places always are. But you don't have to be anything other than yourself." He nodded, though his stomach still fluttered. They walked on, the mist thinning as the land opened up. Ahead, the low shape of the school emerged, solid and grey, crouched at the edge of the village like it had been waiting a very long time for children to return. "You'll learn things there," his mother said. "Some useful, some forgettable, and some you won't realize matter until much later." Shane thought of his grandmother's stories, of his grandfather's warnings, of Maeve's knowing smile. He wondered which of those counted as lessons, and who decided. As they neared the school gate, children's voices began to rise from the yard. Laughter, shouting, the scrape of boots on stone. Real, ordinary sounds, not magical at all. His mother squeezed his hand once. "Everything will be all right," she said. "This is just another beginning." Shane took a breath and stepped forward. He did not know it yet, but the land was listening, quietly, patiently, as it always did when something new began. Shane stood just inside the schoolyard gate and watched his mother walk away. She did not look back, only because she knew if she did, he might run after her. Her steps were steady as she followed the lane back toward the farm, her figure slowly softening in the morning light until the mist swallowed her whole. Something tight closed around Shane's chest. It was the first time since arriving in Ireland that he felt truly alone. The schoolyard stretched out before him, wider than he had expected. The ground was hard-packed earth, scuffed and marked by countless feet. A low stone wall ringed the space, and beyond it rose hedges and fields that felt suddenly very far away. Children filled the yard. They moved in loud clusters, laughing and shouting, their voices sharp and unguarded. Boys ran in rough packs, boots kicking dust, shoulders colliding without apology. One pair wrestled near the wall, rolling and grappling until another boy cheered them on. Their laughter was not unkind, but it was careless, the sort that came from confidence Shane did not yet possess. He hovered at the edge, fingers worrying the strap of his satchel. The boys looked hard to him, weathered already, like small versions of men who had learned early how to take up space. They spoke fast and loud, words overlapping, gestures broad. Shane imagined stepping into their circle and felt his stomach sink. Girls gathered in smaller groups, their voices lower, eyes sharp and observant. He felt them glance at him and then look away again, filing him away somewhere he could not yet see. No one spoke to him. The bell had not rung yet, but time seemed to stretch, each moment dragging its heels. Shane shifted his weight, suddenly aware of his hands, his posture, the way he stood apart like something misplaced. He told himself it was only for now, that his mother had been right, that this feeling would pass. Still, as he watched the other children move with easy familiarity through a world he did not yet understand, Shane felt small, smaller than he had at the church, smaller even than on the dock when he first stepped onto Irish soil. The farm felt far away. The house felt distant. And for the first time since crossing the water, Shane wished, quietly, fiercely, that someone he knew would find him here. Shane was still standing there trying to look as though he belonged when he felt it. That faint prickle at the back of his neck. The sense of being noticed again. He turned. Maeve stood a few paces away, her hands clasped behind her back, watching him as though she'd been expecting him all along. The morning light caught in her dark braid, and her boots were already dusted white at the toes, as if she'd been everywhere before anyone else had properly arrived. "You made it," she said. Shane blinked. Yes, I mean, of course." She nodded once, satisfied. "Some people don't." That wasn't reassuring, but she said it as though it were a simple fact, not a warning. She stepped closer, lowering her voice just enough to make the space between them feel smaller. "You're standing where new people stand," she observed, "by the gate, watching exits." "I wasn't," Shane began. "You were," she said gently. "It's all right." She glanced toward the knot of boys wrestling near the wall. "They'll leave you alone if you don't run and don't boast. Either one makes it worse." Shane stared at her. "How do you know that?" Maeve shrugged. "I pay attention." She tilted her head, studying him. "You feel it too, don't you? That stretch in your chest, like you've been set down somewhere without instructions." He hesitated, then nodded. "Good," she said. "That means you're not dull." Before he could ask what she meant, the bell rang, loud and sudden, slicing through the yard. Children groaned, scattered, called to one another. Maeve turned toward the door without hurry. "Come on," she said over her shoulder. "If you walk in alone, they'll remember it. If you walk in with me, they won't know what to think." Shane followed her, still unsure whether he'd been rescued or recruited. As they crossed the yard together, Shane felt the tightness in his chest ease, just a little. Maeve walked as though the school belonged to her, as though it had already told her its secrets. And Shane suspected strongly that she was exactly the kind of person who listened when places spoke back. They entered the classroom together. The room smelled of chalk dust and damp wool, of old wood warmed by too many bodies in too little space. Light fell through tall, narrow windows, catching on slate boards and names carved into scarred desks. The walls were bare save for a crooked map and a framed catechism, both watching silently. Maeve moved without hesitation, guiding them down the aisle between desks as children turned to look. The sound of boots scraping the floor seemed far too loud to Shane, each step announcing him as new. That was when he felt it. A stare, not curious, not surprised, cold. Shane glanced sideways and saw the boy watching him from the far side of the room. He was bigger than most, broad-shouldered even at this age, with close-cropped hair and eyes that did not blink. His mouth was set in a flat line, as if Shane's very presence were an offence that needed remembering. The boy did not look away. Shane's stomach tightened. The room felt suddenly smaller, the air thicker. He had the uneasy sense of having crossed into something without knowing the rules, of being weighed and found wanting by someone who already knew how things worked here. Maeve noticed at once. She followed Shane's gaze and gave a quiet, dismissive sniff. "That's Declan," she murmured. "He always stares. It's how he decides things." "Decides what?" Shane whispered. "If he likes you," she said, "or if he doesn't." That didn't help. They took their seats near the middle of the room. Shane sat stiffly, hands folded on the desk, acutely aware of the boy's eyes still on him. Even when the teacher entered and the class began to settle, Shane could feel that stare like a weight between his shoulders. Maeve leaned closer, her voice calm. "Don't stare back. He thinks that's an invitation." Shane fixed his eyes on the desk instead, tracing a gouge in the wood with his thumb. His heart beat faster than it should have for something as simple as sitting still. Yet Maeve sat easily beside him, unbothered, as though cold stares and silent judgments were just another part of the landscape, no more alarming than stone walls or narrow lanes. Shane envied her that. As the teacher began the day, and chalk scratched against slate, Shane tried to focus, but part of him remained alert, listening, not for the land this time, but for the quiet tension threading the room. He had made it into the school, now he would have to learn how to survive it. The teacher had a soundless authority that stilled the room. She was a tall woman with her hair drawn back tightly and a mouth that looked as though it had learned long ago how to keep secrets. Her dress was plain and dark, her shoes sensible, and when she set her books down on the desk, the scrape of wood on wood cut through the last whispers like a warning bell. Shane understood at once. This was a woman who missed nothing. The teacher turned to face the class. "Good morning," she said, and the class rose as one. "Sit," she said firmly. They obeyed just as quickly. She surveyed them with a practiced eye, counting, measuring, noticing absences and changes. Her gaze paused on Shane for half a breath longer than the others, not unkindly, but precisely. "We have someone new with us," she said. "Stand up, please." Shane's heart dropped. He stood, legs stiff, suddenly aware of every inch of himself. His too short sleeves, the way his collar sat crooked, the heat flooding his face. All eyes turned toward him, curiosity sharpening into interest. "Tell us your name," the teacher said, "and where you've come from." "My name is Shane," he said, his voice thinner than he'd hoped. "I've come from England." There was a brief silence. Then Declan spoke. "Did they send him here because he talked too much?" The laughter burst out before Shane could understand the words fully. Boys snorted. A girl slapped her hand over her mouth. Someone repeated it under their breath, and the room rippled again. Shane felt the heat in his face deepen, spreading to his ears, his neck. He wished, desperately, that the floor would open and take him. Only Maeve did not laugh. She sat very still, her mouth set, eyes fixed not on Shane but on Declan, sharp and assessing, as though she were committing something important to memory. The teacher rapped her knuckles on the desk. "That will do." The laughter died at once. She turned her gaze on Declan, cool and unwavering. "You may think you're clever," she said, "but cleverness is only useful when it's kind. Sit properly." Declan slouched back, still smirking, but he said nothing more. The teacher looked back at Shane. "You're welcome here," she said simply. "Sit down." Shane did, his hands trembling just slightly as he folded them on the desk. The room settled again, chalk resumed its scratch against the board, and the lesson moved on as if nothing unusual had happened. But Shane's chest still felt tight, his ears still rang faintly with laughter. Beside him, Maeve leaned closer and whispered, so softly only he could hear. "That wasn't funny. It wasn't much. But it was enough to keep Shane upright in his seat, breathing, waiting, for whatever this place would ask of him next." The lesson continued as if nothing unusual had happened. The teacher spoke in a measured voice, steady and precise, setting sums on the board and reading passages aloud that the children copied onto their slates. Chalk dust hung faintly in the air, catching the light from the tall windows. The scrape of slate pencils filled the room, a soft, constant whisper. Shane tried to follow. He bent over his slate, copying the numbers carefully, but the figures swam and slid away from him. His thoughts kept drifting, back to the laughter, to Declan's stare, to the way Maeve had not joined in. Each time the teacher's voice rose or fell, his shoulders tensed, half expecting his name to be called again. Around him, the other children worked with practiced ease. Slates were wiped clean and filled again. Pages were turned. Someone sniffed, someone coughed. The ordinary sounds of learning pressed in on him, yet he felt oddly removed from them, like he was watching through a pane of glass. He glanced once toward the window. Beyond it the fields lay bright and open, grass stirring under the breeze. A crow lifted from a fence post, black against the pale sky. For a moment, Shane imagined stepping outside, breathing freely, letting the land speak if it wished. His pencil slipped, scratching an uneven line across the slate. "Mind your work," the teacher said without looking up. "Yes, miss," Shane murmured, heat creeping back into his cheeks. He forced his attention down again, counting carefully, lips moving as he worked. Still, his thoughts wandered. He wondered what Maeve knew that he didn't. He wondered what rules applied here, at school, on the land, among children, and how long it would take before he learned them. By the time the lesson shifted from numbers to reading, his head felt full and heavy. Words blurred together on the blackboard, their meaning slipping away almost as soon as he caught it. He sat very still, afraid to draw notice, afraid to fail at something he had not yet been taught how to do. When the bell finally rang for the break, the sound startled him so badly he nearly dropped his slate. He looked up, heart racing, and realized he had been holding his breath for far too long. The moment the children spilled into the yard, the noise rushed back in. Boots striking stone, voices rising, laughter breaking loose like it had been waiting to escape the walls. Shane followed Maeve outside, grateful for the air, though his chest still felt tight from holding himself together all morning. He stayed close to the wall, watching. That was when Declan stepped in front of him. Up close, he seemed even bigger, shoulders squared, hands shoved into his pockets as if he had nothing to lose. His eyes flicked over Shane quickly, taking stock, his posture, his quiet, the way he didn't immediately look back. "So," Declan said, voice low and casual. "England." Shane nodded. "Yes." Declan smirked. "Thought so. You don't walk right." What?" Shane said. "You walk like you're waiting to be told where to go," Declan replied. A couple of boys lingered nearby now, pretending not to listen while listening very carefully. Shane felt his throat tighten. He searched for something to say, something clever, something strong, but nothing came. Every answer he imagined sounded wrong before it reached his mouth. Declan leaned in a little. "You soft." The word landed heavier than Shane expected. "I'm not," Shane began, then faltered. Declan's smile widened, satisfied. Before Shane could find his footing, Maeve stepped forward. "He's new," she said sharply, "and he didn't ask for your opinion." Declan turned to her, surprised. "This isn't your business." "It is when you make it everyone's," she replied. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were bright and unyielding. "You only pick on people who won't hit back." A murmur ran through the small crowd. Declan flushed. "Mind yourself, Maeve." She didn't blink. "Or what?" For a moment it looked as though Declan might push it further. Then he laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "Didn't know he needed a keeper," he said, stepping back. "Figures." The boys drifted away with him, already bored now that the moment had lost its edge. Shane stood frozen, heat flooding his face. He felt smaller than ever, not because Declan had spoken to him, but because he hadn't spoken for himself. "I'm sorry," he muttered to Maeve. "I should have said something." She looked at him sideways. "You didn't need to." "It was embarrassing," Shane said quietly. "You defending me?" Maeve shrugged. "He was testing you, that's all." "Did I fail?" Shane asked. She considered him for a moment. "No," she said. "You just didn't play his game." "That didn't feel like a victory." The bell rang again, sharp and unforgiving. As they turned back toward the school door, Shane's cheeks still burned, but beneath the embarrassment, something else stirred too. Gratitude, and the uneasy knowledge that this place had rules just as old and unforgiving as the land. And he was only beginning to learn which ones could be broken and which ones could not. The rest of the school day passed slowly, too slowly. Shane returned to his desk with his head down, the warmth of embarrassment still burning beneath his skin. Every sound felt sharper now, every whisper louder. When someone laughed, even softly, his heart jumped, certain it was meant for him. He told himself it wasn't true. He told himself people had already forgotten. But humiliation has a way of stretching time. During the next lesson, the teacher's voice seemed distant, as though it were coming from the far end of a long tunnel. Words reached him but did not stay. He copied what was written on the board without really seeing it, his hand moving on instinct while his thoughts replayed the moment in the yard again and again. "You soft?" The question followed him everywhere. He imagined the other children talking about him when he wasn't listening, about the English boy who couldn't stand up for himself, who needed a girl to speak for him. Each shuffle of feet, each suppressed giggle felt like confirmation. Maeve caught his eye once and gave him a small, reassuring nod. Shane looked away, ashamed that he needed it. By afternoon, his shoulders ached from holding themselves tight. Even sitting still felt like effort. The classroom grew warmer, the air thick with bodies and dust, and the ticking of the clock on the wall became unbearable. Each second seemed to pause before moving on, as though the day were doing this deliberately. He watched the light change outside the window, marking time better than the lessons did. Clouds passed, shadows shifted, freedom edged closer, minute by minute. When the closing bell finally rang, the sound tore through him like relief made noise. Chairs scraped back, children surged toward the door, laughter returning easily now that the day was nearly done. Shane packed his satchel with shaking hands, desperate to be gone, to put distance between himself and the room that had shrunk around him. Outside the air felt cooler, kinder. As he stepped away from the schoolyard, heart still sore and heavy, Shane knew one thing with painful certainty. He had never wanted a day to end so badly in his life. Shane found his mother waiting where the lane widened near the school, her figure familiar and steady against the lowering light. Relief washed over him at the sight of her, though it brought with it a sudden heaviness too, as if the day had been waiting for permission to settle fully on his shoulders. They set off together without hurry. The afternoon had softened into evening, the fields turning a deeper green, shadows pooling along the hedgerows. Birds flitted low and quick, and somewhere a gate creaked as someone farther off closed in their animals for the night. "Well?" his mother asked gently after a few minutes. "How was your first day?" Shane shrugged. "Fine." She glanced down at him, unsurprised by the answer. "What did you learn?" "Things," he said. "Numbers, reading, chalk dust." The words stayed inside him, tangled and sharp-edged, not fit for sharing. "And the other children?" she asked. "Did you meet anyone?" Shane kicked at a stone and watched it skid ahead of them. "They're loud." She smiled a little at that. "They usually are." They walked on. The lane dipped, then rose again, opening briefly onto a wide stretch of fields. Shane breathed in the damp, earthy air, letting it fill the space where words threatened to spill out. He didn't want to explain. He didn't want to hear the day spoken aloud and made real again. His mother tried once more. "You don't have to tell me everything," she said carefully. "But if something troubled you—" "I'm just tired," Shane said quickly. She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "All right." Her hand found his shoulder, warm and grounding, and stayed there as they walked. She didn't press him, didn't fill the silence with reassurance or advice. She let the path speak instead, the crunch of gravel, the whisper of grass, the steady rhythm of two people moving forward together. Shane was grateful for that. By the time the farmhouse came into view, smoke rising gently into the cooling air, the tight knot in his chest had loosened just enough for him to breathe. He still didn't want to think about tomorrow. But for now the walk was over, and that was sufficient. That evening, the farmhouse gathered itself around the table once more, warm with firelight and the steady comfort of routine. The meal was simple and filling. Bread, stew again, thick with vegetables. But Shane barely noticed the taste this time. He ate quietly, eyes lowered, answering questions with nods or single words when they came his way. His grandmother spoke easily, filling the space with small observations about the day, and his mother listened, grateful for the ordinary sound of it all. Only his grandfather watched Shane closely, not in a way that drew attention, no staring, no questions, but with the same patient awareness he gave to weather and animals and land that might turn if ignored. He noticed how Shane's shoulders stayed tight, how his spoon paused too often above the bowl, how his laughter never came. When the meal was finished and the dishes cleared, his grandfather stood and reached for his coat. "Come on, lad," he said lightly. "Give us a hand with the animals before the light goes." Shane looked up, surprised, then nodded at once. Anything was better than sitting still with his thoughts. His grandmother raised an eyebrow. "Don't keep him out too long." "I won't," his grandfather said. "Just long enough to settle things." Outside, the evening had deepened. The sky stretched thin and pale above the fields. The air smelled of cooling earth and hay. They walked in companionable silence toward the sheds, the familiar sounds of the farm settling around them, low murmurs, soft shifting, the scrape of hooves against ground. His grandfather moved with easy confidence, checking gates, laying out feed, speaking softly to the animals as if they were old friends. Shane followed, doing as he was shown, grateful for the simple work that asked something of his hands but nothing of his voice. After a while, as they stood together by the fence, his grandfather spoke, not looking at him. "First days are hard," he said. Shane swallowed. "I didn't like it much." "No," his grandfather said. "I thought you mightn't." They stood there a moment longer, the animals calm around them, the last light fading from the fields. Shane felt some of the day's weight ease, not because it had been named, but because it had been noticed. Sometimes he was learning, that was enough. Dusk pressed in around the sheds, the sky deepening toward blue, the first star pricking through like a careful thought. His grandfather leaned on the fence, hands folded, watching a cow nose at her feed. "I didn't do very well today," Shane said at last. His grandfather didn't turn. "School's not measured in single days," he said softly. Shane swallowed. "A boy, Declan," he made a joke. Everyone laughed. He hesitated, then forced the words out. "He said I was soft." The word sounded smaller, spoken aloud, but it still stung. His grandfather nodded slowly, as if this were a thing he'd been expecting to hear sooner or later. And were you? Shane frowned. I didn't know what to say. I just stood there. Maeve told him off instead. Shane waited for disappointment, for correction. Instead, his grandfather shifted his weight and sighed. Not heavily, just thoughtfully. That sort of boy, he said, tests fences, pushes to see what gives. I felt stupid, Shane admitted. Like everyone was looking at me, like I didn't belong there. His grandfather turned then, resting his arms on the fence, meeting Shane's eyes squarely. Did you hit him? No. Did you run? No. Did you say something you didn't mean just to sound brave? Shane shook his head. Then you did better than you think, his grandfather said. Shane blinked. I did? Aye, you stood your ground. Quiet doesn't mean weak. He smiled faintly. Some folk mistake noise for strength. Takes them a lifetime to learn otherwise. Shane looked down at his boots. It was still awful. His grandfather's hand came down, heavy and warm on Shane's shoulder. It was, and it won't be the last hard day. But it won't always be that boy, and it won't always be that feeling. He nodded toward the animals. See them. They know who rushes and who doesn't. The loud ones startle easy. The quiet ones last. Shane breathed out slowly, the tightness in his chest easing. And Maeve, his grandfather added, a hint of amusement in his voice. She stuck up for me, Shane said, embarrassed all over again. I didn't like that. No, his grandfather agreed. Pride's a tricky thing. But remember, someone choosing to stand beside you isn't the same as saying you can't stand alone. Shane thought about that as the last light slipped away. As they turned back toward the farmhouse, the windows glowing warm against the dark, Shane felt lighter than he had since the morning. The day had hurt, but it hadn't broken him, and now, at least, he wasn't carrying it by himself. The rest of the week unfolded slowly, one careful day at a time. Shane learned the shape of the school, the way the bell sounded sharper in the morning than in the afternoon, the places where the floorboards creaked, the window that rattled when the wind came in off the fields. The lessons became easier to follow, not because they were simpler, but because he no longer felt quite so exposed. Maeve sat beside him each day without comment, as if it had always been so. They shared slates and whispered corrections, past notes written in careful, crooked letters. She had a way of explaining things that made sense, not just sums and spelling, but people too. Watch where Declan stands, she murmured once when the boys gathered at break. He likes corners, makes him feel in charge. Shane did as she said. He learned when to move and when to stay still, how to keep his head down without seeming afraid. Declan's stares never stopped, but Shane stopped meeting them. He discovered that attention withheld could be its own kind of shield. By Thursday, the laughter felt farther away, not gone, but dulled, as though it had lost interest. At home, the evenings helped. Walking the fields with his grandfather, listening to his grandmother's stories, sitting beside his mother while she mended or read. The days began to balance themselves, school no longer towering quite so large over everything else. On Friday afternoon, as they walked back from school, Shane finally felt something like anticipation instead of dread. Tomorrow's Saturday, he said aloud, more to himself than to Maeve. Maeve nodded. Market day. My granddad says we're going together, Shane said, a small smile tugging at his mouth. He says the whole world turns up. Maeve's eyes brightened. Then you'll hear more than you mean to. What do you mean? She shrugged. Markets are where stories trade hands. Shane thought of his grandfather's steady presence, of the bustle he imagined waiting beyond the quiet fields. For the first time all week, he found himself looking forward instead of bracing himself. Saturday was coming, and with it something new.